All right. If everyone's ready, I'm going to get started. And the room, again, will still fill up. There's a ton of people on this call. And I think that's fabulous and an indication of just how much interest there is in this space right now. So, good morning, good afternoon, really, I should say. I'm Kelly Evans, and I'm the moderator for today's event convened by AIF, which is the Autism and Behavioral Health Investment Roundtable. Many of you may know me from my role at CNBC. I'm host of The Exchange, co-anchor of Power Lunch. I'm also the mom of six, including my newest, who was born in August, so she's about 2 months old right now. So it's an honor to moderate today's discussion. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Special thank you to AIF for organizing today's event. Again, we've been hearing so much from people who are really looking forward to this discussion today. A huge thank you to these world-class panelists who we're going to hear from. Many who are participating in this event, including myself, have a direct connection to autism and behavioral health issues. So, my oldest was diagnosed when he was about 4, and my oldest boy, my oldest girl, was a clearer case. She was diagnosed when she was just shy of 2 years old, and so please, I would ask everyone on this call to give me the grace. I have had a busy house, and I don't always still myself know that much about this topic or use all the right terminology when it comes to how to discuss autism. I think it's a challenge for parents. It's a challenge for the whole country. It's a challenge for investors. So, roll with me if I don't kind of describe things or say things exactly correctly. Today, more than ever before, autism is part of the national conversation. Just 5 years ago, very few people really thought about this as an investable space, one that had the scale, perhaps. There was a lack of investment capital flowing in into these innovations that could help with whether it's early diagnosis, therapeutic interventions, supporting adults with autism. This is a growing area of need, obviously, and many related behavioral health conditions. The times have clearly changed. So groups like AIF, which has become, the investment and innovation arm of the autism community, major investors like Morgan Health, we have Dan on this call today. They're all demonstrating that autism and behavioral health are both investable and that there are some huge opportunities. So this event is quite timely, to say the least. And here's basically how it's going to work. We have an hour. This is being recorded. A replay will be sent to everyone on the call today, and it will also be posted on LinkedIn. So just be aware if you missed something, or do know that there are, this will be shared. There are people in the media here as well. The format will be a webinar, so there won't be live questions, but we have a broad range of topics, hopefully, that address a lot of these issues on everybody's minds. I'll ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves. We'll kick things off with a question to one of them, but would like everyone to weigh in, kind of keep this moving. And then we'll let you know when we have a, kind of a 5 minute, 10-minute warning kind of thing, time for just two more questions. Obviously, to the panelists, be as succinct as possible so we can get in a lot of these questions. So with that said, let's do a quick round of self-intros and we'll get started. And Chris, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly, for taking time on maternity leave and moderating the panel today. And thank you for all the panelists. I'm Chris Mail, co-founder, managing partner of the Autism Impact Fund. Much like Kelly and many others, I entered the autism journey with my son, Duke. He was diagnosed 7 years ago, profoundly autistic. And navigating that journey was one of the most challenging things I'd ever seen, from getting a diagnosis to treatment to care. One of the more broken, antiquated, fragmented systems we had ever really seen. And while there's great work being done with nonprofits and foundations, as you pointed out, there was really no investment arm or real investment capital flowing into the space. So with that, we built a team and really set out on a mission to revolutionize the status quo for diagnosing, treating, living with autism throughout the entire lifespan. But not just autism, other co-occurring conditions and comorbidities that often come with autism. As you mentioned, we aim to be the investment and innovation arm of the community, and I'm really proud and happy to say 5 years later, we've accomplished that, and the thesis is proven out. So really excited to be here today with you and everyone, so thank you.
All right, Jennifer, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Jennifer Frist. I am the mom of a 23-year-old son on the spectrum, and I am a philanthropist and an investor. And obviously, it's near and dear to my heart. I helped get behind and establish the first Center for Autism and Innovation at Vanderbilt University in the engineering school there, which was on purpose, and an early investor in AIF when I met Chris about 5 years ago. I'm happy to be here today.
Dan, why don't you jump in?
Great. I'm Dan Mendelsohn. I run Morgan Health. We're a group within JP Morgan Chase, and our mission is to drive innovation in employer-sponsored healthcare. We focus on improving quality, improving affordability, and improving health equity. And we're a group of 30. We started this up about 4 years ago. We're investing off of the JP Morgan Chase balance sheet, and everything we do is double bottom line investing, meaning that we have social purpose to the investments that we make, and then we're also responsible for a reasonable return on capital for the bank. And our interest in autism really comes from listening to our employees. About half of Americans get their insurance through their employer. About half of American kids get their insurance through a parent's employer. And what that means is that, we employers really are a major driving force in driving the care of autism and really all other conditions that kids face. And listening to our employees, hearing, the issues around particularly care coordination, which we'll talk about, I know, in a lot more detail as we get into the panel, was really what motivated us to jump in to this space.
Great. And Neil?
Thanks, Kelly. Really a huge honor for me to be here. I'm Neil Hotengatti. I'm a physician. I run an organization called Cortica. We were founded by academic physicians really to improve and streamline the journey that Chris spoke about. We were very moved by how challenging it is for parents to navigate really a fragmented ecosystem across diagnosticians, different treatment providers, and we wanted to bring that all together into one team so that parents could really have a trusted source of information and care. And we operate across four clinical areas: medical care, behavioral or ABA therapy, developmental therapies, which include things like speech, occupational feeding therapy, and then we have counseling and school support, because it's so important to work with parents as they transition kids into school and beyond that into vocation and adulthood. And just excited to be here today and be part of this really great group.
Neil, a quick follow-up on that. Who's the payer for what you provide, out of curiosity?
Yeah, it's health plans. So it was really important when so in the very beginning, the origin story is that we were a clinic that wanted to do the best things for families and weren't taking insurance. We were private pay in the very beginning, which a lot of concierge or pediatric practices have evolved to do. But starting in 2017, we really had an imperative to make this accessible to families across the country. And so we partner with health plans, either on a fee-for-service basis or a value-based care basis, so that families only pay what their plan requires them to in terms of deductibles, out of pocket. Long answer to your short question, it's plans who manage both commercial and Medicaid benefits.
Thank you. No, that clarifies things for sure. All right, we'll get to our first question, Chris, which I offered to you. We're all familiar with the focus on autism from the current administration. Can you please elaborate further on what all of this national attention means for autism and for behavioral health from an investment perspective? Where is the greatest innovation happening, and where are you most excited to place your bets?
Sure, it certainly is a great moment in time. As I mentioned, we launched AIF 5 years ago after seeing the skyrocketing need and clear investment opportunity, not just in autism, also behavioral health and all of the co-occurring conditions. And for those that may not know, that includes everything from epilepsy to ADHD, a broad mental behavioral health bucket. Most individuals diagnosed with autism have, additional diagnoses. So the opportunity from an investment standpoint and the market standpoint is massive. The news in the national and global stage, which we'll get into, is incredibly positive. Regardless of your political perspective, we see this elevated conversation is only opening more doors to serious dialogue about investments, not just philanthropy. And there's clearly an important role for philanthropy in the government, but also a critical role for the private sector and opportunity, which is where we're focusing. With Fund One, we had 17 companies, we've had 2 successful exits, and it just continues to validate that the market opportunity is there. The population we serve is massive and underserved across the entire spectrum. So the conversation today is really timely. We're at a great inflection point, and seeing where private capital and foundational capital shifting into private capital or investing in for-profit businesses can really move the needle. And from an investment or innovation standpoint, we're really particularly excited across, obviously, AI. We can't have a conversation without mentioning that. Value-based care, which Neil hit on, not just looking at behavioral, but looking at the ecosystem, the whole child care, including biology, behavioral, environment, and putting all of those three pieces together, AI, value-based care, and whole child care model, is really where we're excited to see better outcomes and opportunities for winners to really drive the needle. So I could go on for hours about all these, but I'll let Dan or another panelist chime in as well.
Could I follow up quickly, Chris, on that and say, for the benefit of our audience, some would be quite familiar with this area, others not so much. Where did you see kind of the greatest ROI in Fund One, and where do you expect to see that in kind of the future couple of years?
Yep, that's a great question. We've seen it in truly driving innovation and improving outcomes. Autism is an incredibly heterogeneous, complex condition. So being able to diagnose with precision, create plans with precision, those not only help drive the financial outcomes, and Neil can get into these, and better outcomes for the patient, but also, for the family and the financial basis. So we saw the most success so far, obviously using tech and AI early on in the more efficiency plays, as you will. And as we look towards the future, you're going to see that get into more personalized plans, outcomes, and then potential drug development across those types of services. We still believe there is humans needed here. So the service models that are proving better outcomes is what we're really excited about.
Neil, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I really like what Chris said around a personalized approach that's evidence-based and research-based for each child. This is an extremely heterogeneous condition. We all know it as a spectrum. It's also very, very heterogeneous in the etiology, so the cause and comorbidities for each child. And really, I mean, the model that I think about that does this extremely well is oncology, that for a cancer patient, we as a society or as a medical field know extremely well what is the exact mutation that's causing the issue. How do we have precision guided therapy for that mutation? You wouldn't give patient A the same thing as patient B unless there's biological reason for it. And so that opportunity in autism is tremendous over the next 5 to 10 years for us to really understand for each child what are potential causes and maybe much more importantly, what are the co-occurring conditions, the comorbidities, and how can we address all of that holistically in a very precision-based way to give that particular child their best outcomes.
Could I ask, Neil, when I think oncology, I think of some of the biotechs that have been very successful in that sense. Again, there's an ROI for investors. Oftentimes there's not. But what is the similar kind of analogy to the world or field of autism?
Yeah, there are precision-based diagnostic companies going after autism, and there are precision-based therapeutic companies, and the therapeutic span drug and device. So, example of a diagnostic company or a technology that there's one around eye tracking, a company called Early Point, decades of data by two really smart psychologists and neuroscientists who are at Yale and then at Emory, essentially tracking eye movement of children who are very young in response to different stimuli. And based on where they look at in response to stimuli, you can phenotype what are the challenges that need to be optimized? How do you phenotype a child with precision? On the biotech side, we've been, just as one example, really intrigued with microbiome modulating therapies because microbiome is such a natural thing. We all want to have an optimized, all of us want an optimized microbiome, and there's known data on gut-brain axis, and so a healthy microbiome actually leads to all sorts of downstream sort of healthiness. And so there's a really great work out of Caltech that won the PI MacArthur Genius Award that talks about the role of the microbiome in autism. And so modulating that's an AIF portfolio company. It's a really great natural target. And then there's a device therapy we're really excited in around virtual reality that personalizes learning for each child with autism in a VR environment that is a faster and safer way to do lessons compared to the real world. So these are all companies that have formed out of these technologies. They're grounded in really strong science, just like oncology companies. And as they come to fruition, we as clinicians, as physicians, love having our toolkit grow more and more. Our toolkit today is pretty limited compared to the oncology toolkit or the cardiology toolkit. And we look forward to a day when there's a lot more that we can use for diagnosis, drug treatment, device treatment.
That's great. And I appreciate the specifics. I'm sure the audience does as well. I was just chuckling because I was speaking with Jamie Pagliaro yesterday, obviously, who's now the new CEO of Early Point. So the idea that, when your child is 16 months old, that perhaps eye tracking could help with the diagnosis, I think would be very interesting to a lot of parents, whether of everybody, right, to try to figure out what might be going on with their child. Jennifer, do you have anything to add? When he mentioned VR and AI a little bit, I was curious if you see those tools as well as kind of significantly enhancing some of the options and opportunities for adults with autism, or kind of for people in the academic world as well.
Sure. One of the things that we're doing at the center at Vanderbilt is trying to commercialize some of these assistive technologies that are coming out to help with job coaching or job interviewing, and so I think a new sort of, sidebar that we're kind of really doing is trying to launch those into the world, and make them commercially viable, and get them out to the people that need them the most. And partnering with companies, but we also have our own internal research teams and labs that are developing these great technologies. So, making this available to people is definitely a priority.
It's such a good point about interviewing and job prep. I did not think at all in that dimension. That makes so much sense. Dan, we'll kind of still wrap this up, staying somewhat on the first topic here, but kind of moving into the second question, which was going to be, obviously, you guys are a huge investor. Where do you see the opportunities in this space? What's your perspective on how and where to seek scale solutions? And especially kind of from the employer point of view, I think we'd all love to know how you're thinking through this.
Great. And, maybe I'll start with the government question because I'd like to add to what Chris said. I agree. I think we're in a time where there's a lot of focus and attention on autism, which is great. It's stimulating a lot of discussion. I think the administration has a lot that they can do if they want to start to address the issues through government programs. So, for example, better payment through Medicaid, very, very important. There are a lot of kids with Medicaid coverage who need care. Better coverage under Medicaid is another. Every government organization runs a healthcare program for its workers. So the Federal Employee Health Benefit Program has about 4 million workers who get their insurance, and having more progressive policies in FEHB could be very productive. Every state has state workers, and what are the coverage policies around those? And to the point that Jennifer was making about making sure that all of the technologies actually get to the people who need them, we have a long way to go in all of those programs that are actually overseen by the government. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Now, kind of second point is on something that Neil mentioned with respect to getting major payers involved. These are the insurance companies, Cigna, Aetna, United, and the like. We're an investor in Cortica, and one of the things that we are working on with them is getting them in front of senior people within these insurance companies to make sure that they have a voice. And look, we know from our employees' experience that we need more integrated care and that there's a lot of waste and inefficiency that comes along with this fee-for-service model where you pay every time you go in. And the fact is that the Cortica model is so much more efficient for the parents involved because everything is under one roof. And so, kind of having an opportunity to be able to accommodate that kind of payment is really critically important. And so this is another place where we have a lot of work to do. And I will say kind of that we don't go into any investment if there isn't a lot of work to do. And that's part of kind of why we invest, because we believe that the energy that our team creates can help accelerate the progress. So kind of that's why we're into it. So Kelly, on the question, on the kind of more recent question that you asked about the employer lens, employers, I think it's fair to say most employers do not end up having the resources to really think through the clinical issues on behalf of their employees and their employees' families. And so employers have historically been passive with respect to getting involved in clinical issues. We're an exception to that. There are a range of other companies that are exception to that: Boeing, Walmart, Microsoft. There are a number of companies that are kind of on the leading edge and really pushing things along. I don't think that we can wait to expect that employers are going to be the prime motivator when it comes to improving autism care. But employers can be a good partner in helping to change the business practices of the insurance companies, which is really how we're engaged right now.
And just one more time, can you explain? So the fee for service model we're all used to, and where there seems to be a lot of private equity involvement and maybe potential, what does Cortica do differently that you think represents, a better opportunity?
With Cortica, there's full spectrum care under one roof, and so all of the different types of services that a kid needs are all accessible. And we want to see Cortica paid on the basis of the value that is producing to the healthcare system, which is considerable, so that ultimately employees will have a choice to be able to go into that system seamlessly. And that's really the focus for us. I know it's a focus for Neil and his team, and it's really about getting the payment done differently. I think that one of the most important ways that private equity investors engage is when things need to be changed. And here's a place where we need to change from this fee-for-service payment to a payment that's really based on the value of what is being produced and is more comprehensive in nature.
And right, and is that ultimately a call that the insurance companies have to make, And so that's like a societal change, but maybe it can start
And
here.
it's like they do work for us, and so
Yeah.
that's something that we're
Oh, really?
trying to remind them. Exactly.
Yeah. Jennifer, if we could circle back to the adults with autism, we were asking earlier about some of the ways that technology might open up some avenues there. What are the areas of greatest need? If you had more capital deployed, how should it be put to work?
When we started this journey, there was a lot of advocacy and awareness that was really starting to happen, and that was great. But there wasn't really a lot of help, and I was seeing a massive need for just helping grown neurodiverse individuals, be able to thrive, live their best lives. They weren't really being given employment opportunities to create careers or to live the best life they could live with meaning and purpose. And so, I started to, think about why that was and how do you change mindsets about the employability of these great, talented individuals. And so, the first Center for Autism at Vanderbilt was that paired with some great employment models was really, taking the risk part of it out for an employee to be able to hire and train these individuals. But that meant we really needed to match skill sets with the job opportunities that were out there. And so, creating a model where we could really help with the assessment piece of what are the skill sets and then matching and pairing those with available jobs. And sometimes that required some minor accommodations. Sometimes that required, major accommodation, but there was a huge need to sort of bridge that gap. And so, coming up with those assessments and then being able to put people in a position where we could not only track the success, but the non-success and why that was, and just improve the model in terms of, helping people build careers if they wanted. And so for me, that was really important because, if you match someone with a skill set that they're really good at, they're going to be successful and do a great job. And so that was really interesting to me in terms of making this then now a model that was scalable and replicable. And that, what I found was that people were doing what worked for their particular situation, for their family or their communities, but it wasn't. It was sort of like the model was getting rewritten over and over again, and it wasn't scalable. So investing in those types of models where it can be replicable, and scalable in other markets was super important in getting the word out.
And it's tricky because there's this joke that goes around that I saw the other day about, oh yeah, if your kid has autism, they're just going to grow up and become Elon Musk, as if,
Yeah.
and so, when we talk about supporting autistic individuals in the workplace, eh, there seems to be kind of society grappling with, is this a help? I mean, we've seen it be, is it a help? Is it a hindrance? Is it just mean that there are certain types of occupations or roles within certain types of work that they are much more likely to find success with? And I don't know if you can shed any light on that discussion, again, kind of as it relates back to what should the goals be?
I think finding purpose and meaning in life is the best goal we can give our children that become adults. And that could be at a high level, like an Elon Musk level, or a very low level. Like, what is it for each individual? And that's. But I think, in any job, like if you are well suited for the task and you've got the right skill sets for it, you're going to be successful and you're going to be great at that job. And you're going to find meaning and purpose in that. So that's important. Another huge barrier to having a job is just being able to get there. So one of the technologies we've developed is a driving simulator that's very tailored towards people that are neurodiverse, that need maybe a little extra time or a little bit different accommodation to learn how to drive, because that's a huge hindrance to getting a job and keeping a job, is just getting to work there and back every day. So
That's a
those are
great point.
important. Those are important things to think about,
Right,
and
right.
the
I've
whole person,
noticed.
surrounding the whole person with all the tools that they need to be successful.
Right. Like in some cases, people need, for instance, a more fixed schedule, a more reliable workflow, things that from an employer point of view might be like, hey, that's great, but to not know there's one kind of employee that might respond better to flexibility and spontaneity. And then there's another kind who really doesn't like that, but the same organization or same role could really be catered to either. Sometimes you could think about, which is a better match.
Well,
Um,
and I will say, it's kind of a snowball effect. Once you get one success story in a company, they're like, "Gosh, can you give me 10 more people like this?" Like, they are so successful. They're and that's what changes mindsets of like, this can work. This is not so daunting. This is not so scary. This was a minor thing we just had to accommodate for, and look at what a great employee we have, and look at what a success story it can be.
That's awesome. Neil, I was going to kind of get right into the like, I think we'd be remiss during this whole thing if we don't talk about your takeaway, especially as a whole child medical provider, from the announcement last month by the president and RFK Jr. about the causes of autism. What are the implications for diagnosis, for therapeutic interventions, for the insurance industry, and for where people might be looking to place their investment capital? I'd obviously love everyone's perspective on this, but Neil, go ahead. You're first.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kelly. And just if I may, I'd love to just commend Jennifer and the work that you guys are doing and how it segues from our model to that work, and then get to your question. But we at Cortica essentially are birthed to 21 with a particular focus on early intervention, and where we see a real challenge in the market is as kids are getting into that age of driving and finding a job, and said so well around like finding purpose and meaning in life and independent living. That's often where there's a sort of a lack of resources, lack of innovation. And so I think it's really great that the Frisk Center is putting resources into that, scaling that, because that's a place where we do our best work, get kids living their best lives, but that often tends to be a place where like health insurance stops paying for stuff, and it's no longer healthcare. It's about transitioning into society, and so that's a really neat area that we'd love to see kind of more innovation. It helps us as our kids age out, particularly for us as a early intervention focused provider. For your great question, Kelly, around just the timeliness of what came out a couple weeks ago. Like others have said, I think we view this positively. There was a lot of political implications, position statements from various medical societies, but fundamentally, the spotlight on autism is very, very helpful. What it's done is essentially two things. I think drawn awareness to the condition and created funding opportunities and just a greater awareness of how can we better serve this community. I think that is fully supported from a bipartisan perspective. The other thing it's done is put a spotlight on the medical aspects of autism. I think over the past decade or so, there's been a rise in one particular type of therapy called applied behavioral analysis, ABA. It's gone from no coverage 20 years ago to all 50 state coverage. And it's great in the sense that families with a child with autism are now getting covered resources through ABA. The downside has been it's treated essentially as the only treatment modality in a number of instances. But the reality is, and this administration has shown it, that there's really a complex interplay of genetics and exposures, and so you really need a medical, biological perspective on these children. The announcement around leucovorin, I think, was the true highlight. It got masked in some of the other stuff that came out, but the biggest announcement that is data driven and really credible clinicians is around the use of leucovorin for a subset of children with autism. It's essentially a nutritional supplement, a form of folate. It's been used by neurologists in pediatric conditions for a very long time where there's documented folate deficiency. But there is a subset within autism that have socialization or communication issues where folate's appropriate. We've used it in over 750 patients over a decade. We've seen strong results. We typically trial it for a short period of time, see if it's working. If so, we can extend. But the focus of the administration is to say, hey, leucovorin is something to think about in a subset of patients, a focus on better understanding kind of the things we were talking about before, the etiology of autism as being complex around genetic and exposures. They funded a number of studies to better understand that. That will then drive really personalized identification of comorbidities and causes that will then drive a much better, like precision informed kind of set of therapies. So I think that this movement is great in sort of advancing the science of autism.
Yeah, I would add that I'm in a couple of, text groups with other moms with kids with autism and so forth. And I'd never really heard of leucovorin until very recently, and all of a sudden everyone's trying it, and they're sharing these success stories about, hey, I'm having conversations with my son I didn't have before, or recommendations like make sure you pair it with B12, or make sure. So you're absolutely right that for those who are in the middle of it, that aspect is now where a lot of the attention is going. Even though a lot of people are still talking or joking or whatever about Tylenol. Chris, I'm curious about your perspective on this as well. Does it introduce in any kind of negative way by potentially ascribing Tylenol as a cause, some area in which a future insurance company or something might say, hey, well, then we're going in a different direction because of what we think the causes and effects are, or something? I'm just trying to think through what the implications of this would be, or if you think it's just kind of a passing moment and, ultimately the science will settle where it needs to settle.
I really would agree with everything Neil said. I think it's probably a passing moment specifically to the Tylenol discussion. What I am excited about is some really interesting breakthroughs and innovations that are on the horizon. We're seeing through some of our portfolio companies, exciting announcements to come on that basis. But overall, the amount of data and the proper studies to be done, really looking for the biological causes around this and some of the ways to improve is what we're interested in, what we find to be really, really exciting. So again, good that we're getting the attention. I think it's a fleeting moment, and the work that's been done with Neil and others in the portfolio, we're really excited to announce coming up
Can
soon.
you elaborate, Chris, at all on what you think those kinds of announcements might be that we should expect?
Yes, I think in the past it's been mostly behavioral type announcements. I can't get into too much detail yet. I would say it's going to be more of the biological, more of the environmental type of innovations and opportunities we're seeing. So stay tuned there, I'll say.
As a mom, I that sort of makes me grown, because even when we talk about the biome and the microbiome, I go, I can't get my daughter to eat anything other than this one food. Like, how am I supposed to work on her microbiome? And I understand the powders can be mixed with yogurt, but like everyone knows what I'm talking about. So, or when I think about biological environmental factors, I go, like, what more am I going to have to do or worry about or not do? So, can you speak to the parents who just feel exhausted and overwhelmed by what all of this means?
Yeah, I've lived it as well, and my son won't eat much and trying to do anything. I think it really comes back to taking the whole child approach that will then make this all easier, right? Where if you're just focused on behavioral, you're squandering the gains that are made in the biological and the environmental and the nutritional, and that's where, we've talked a lot about Cortica, but being able to look at it through an ecosystem and have a provider and caregivers that are able to look at it through that entire lens will make things easier. It is making things easier. Duke is, a patient at Cortica, and through applying that model, the gains of 1 + 1 + 1 is much more than three, which is what's exciting. So again, it's not easy, right? It's not easy. Jen knows it's not. I know it's very difficult. But that's where we're excited to see some of these innovations come through that will make it easier for parents and provide better outcomes.
Anyone else want to
Kelly,
jump in? Go ahead, Neil. Yeah.
yeah, I was just gonna say tons of empathy for the challenge that you're talking about around getting your child to eat more than one or two things. In fact, it's probably the number one or number two thing we work on, sleep being the other. And it is exactly as Chris said, this kind of complex interplay around behavior, working with parents. A lot of it's around sensory processing and texture, and there's a lot of kind of bridging from a food they will eat to something else that's close to something else to something else to something else, and then eventually sort of get to the diet you want. And what's interesting about the biome work, I'm not a biome expert, but it's interesting that there's very complicated analysis around what exactly are the metabolites, the bacteria in a healthy microbiome versus potentially neurodivergent microbiome. But the downstream implication for the child is eat whole foods and fiber. You don't need a lot of science to know what to do. You can do a lot of science on the front end of what are the differences, but the end result is essentially just, and the end recommendation rather is eat whole foods, as much fiber as you can, less processed foods. And it's neat to know that what we sort of thought intuitively, actually the science bears out that it causes a different floral environment. Those produce different metabolites that pass through the gut and enhance brain function. It's been shown in mouse models. So it's so important feeding therapy that we sort of take for granted as just being helpful actually is a really important tool.
Kelly, I think in a lot of
Die.
ways,
Yeah.
this discussion is really emblematic of like what happens in healthcare in general, because when the press goes in and when they reported on Tylenol and leucovorin, there was so much focus on Tylenol because it was a more controversial and more frictional recommendation. You had the drama of major medical associations coming out against it, and there was like the frictional part. What endures is the focus on leucovorin, the focus on microbiome, and things do kind of settle themselves out. And I think what's really important for the administration is the staying power and where they're focused in other areas. We talked a little bit about what they cover and how they cover things and how they're engaging with the insurance industry. They could be putting requirements on the insurance industry to make kind of progress in certain areas in autism care. The research function is also critically important, like what's going on at NIH, how centers like Jennifer's are being supported is another area that I think where positive progress can be made. So I think in a lot of ways, there's the flash of the big announcement, and then really how we should be evaluating the administration is by the staying power of the engagement on the things that really matter in autism care.
Jennifer, are they providing that, especially an administration that is kind of bent on, you know, kind of defunding aspects of the government, or maybe that might have I don't know if that's affected you guys at all. Those efforts by Doge and so forth. How much is that at cross purposes with some of these other kind of steps forward on certain autism areas for autism?
Well, this kind of gets into a whole nother topic, but unfortunately, autism, the word autism, somehow along the way got thrown under the DEI mantra because it was just a way to sort of cover people that were neurodiverse in that bucket. And so, unfortunately, the first round of Doge cuts, anything that had anything in that, inclusion being one of them, got cut right away. So yes, we took a hit. Some of that has come
Interesting.
back since then, just because of the, as you do a deeper dive. But again, to Dan's point, a lot of this is noise, and the end result when it settles out is we want to do the best we can for as many people as we can. All of these children, if it's true that it is 1 in 4 people, 1 in 4 kids becomes 1 in 4 adults. That is a tsunami of economic impact for the whole country, of people that are not getting jobs or not being able to build careers, and then possibly parents that are having to stay home to be care providers for those adults. So, it's just something that needs to be thought about, as we go forward and making good decisions about what we're supporting and what we're investing in, and how we're helping people live full lives.
It's a great point. Anyone else before we move on? I feel like we've said it all. So the next thing I wanted to briefly ask about was kind of getting a little bit back to the investment angle on this. We've seen a bunch of deal making suddenly, surge of M&A in the behavioral health space this year. Dan, I don't know if you want to jump in on this first. What's driving this? Do you expect it to continue? Just kind of talk a little bit more about the broader landscape for a lot of the deal making and different kinds of activity that you see.
I think, first, the market is thawing somewhat in general, so there's a more positive climate, for deal making. But I'd say that employers and insurers are increasingly understanding the imperative around mental health generally. So you have the larger companies like Spring and Lyra and others who are kind of bringing kind of more digital engagement in. Chris mentioned AI. There's a lot of interest for the earlier stage companies in figuring out how AI can be deployed responsibly, to engage and help people. And then, so there's a lot of interest that's being driven. And then I think there's a climate that is much more embracing of therapy and of engagement. And so we see that in our employees, particularly the younger employees, much more likely to be engaging on their own mental health. They see it as really kind of part and parcel of healthcare in general. The older employees, not so much. And so that's also a generational shift. And as Jennifer was talking about, kind of the kids who become adults, there's a real element to that because things really do change. We also see in our population, by the way, particularly our younger employees, really want to be able to engage digitally and have kind of other ways of engaging with clinicians, nurses, social workers, others, not just physicians. And so that's kind of another piece that we see changing. But I think that the deal making is just positive for the space and positive ultimately for the people who will be helped by the engagement.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned you guys have had a couple of exits from that first fund. Obviously, the IPO environment's a little bit better now, and I don't know what's going on with the stock market and gold and silver and everything else. But is there something kind of broad that's changing, that's trickling down to the autism investing landscape, or is there something specific related to the national attention, the surge of interest, maybe private equity funds or whatever that's more kind of area specific?
Yes, I think you hit on it, very nicely there. It's private equity, strategics, payers, providers, the roll up. So the fact of the matter is at a macro level, those dynamics still exist. The tailwinds are there, massive supply and growth challenges, supply and demand, highly fragmented, inefficient markets. We're seeing bipartisan administrative support for paying. The first wave was called 5, 6 years ago, a few years ago, of institutional investment into the behavioral aspects of this. Those first, early investors are looking to recap their platform formation. Others are looking to get in now, lessons learned from some of the challenges with staffing and employee and the payer dynamics. So you're seeing that, just pure PE playbook, fiscal kind of recycling of capital. But you're also seeing the new models, the whole child approach, which we've discussed a lot today, not just behavioral, the omni-channel care delivery, whether that's school, home, telehealth, the like, and the ability to show better outcomes. So with the progress of AI, with the progress of these innovations and technologies, they're able to now demonstrate this to the payers and to the world at large. So I think you're going to see, much more M&A through the end of this year and certainly throughout next year in the space, which is obviously great for us.
Yeah, and I've heard investors express some concern with AI arriving on the scene about some of these early stage investments. Neil, anyone, if you want to just kind of respond to that, are we going to see a wave of disruption where people might want to wait on the sidelines to see how those technologies play out, or how do you expect that to affect both the companies and the delivery of kind of autism related services?
I can jump in on that. I mean, we've got a tremendous amount of interest in AI in all different facets, and so there's a lot of capital going into that. And so it's true in healthcare, it's true in financial services, it's true really across the board. Um, the companies are earlier stage that are deploying this technology. So when Chris was talking about the cycle, about and when they started investing, 10 years ago, the companies grow. And when the companies grow, there are more investors who want to engage with them, whether they're IPO candidates or not. So like the bigger private equity firms are not going to invest until the companies achieve a certain size and scale. And I think that it's the same thing in AI in a lot of ways, in the sense that the companies that are doing the most innovative experimentation are very small. Then you also have these very large companies, like Google and Meta and others who are also experimenting, but they've proven not to have evolved a lot of innovation in healthcare over the last decade, and so that's probably not as much of a focus. So I would say that there's a lot of money chasing small companies, and then the question really is kind of how is that going to emerge? The places where we're seeing the most innovation right now that is actually being adopted by the delivery system is over on the administrative side. It's passive listening, it's notes, it's making sure that there aren't duplicate payments. And so that's a place where I expect to see, like, the next couple of years, that part is revolutionized. The clinical side comes later.
Hmm.
Couldn't agree with you more there. We look at it, that first part or that last part you mentioned, is kind of the low hanging fruit with the care management, care delivery, the efficiencies, the back office, largely because we know what needs to be done with or without AI. And we have some idea how to assess gains, but getting into the personalized treatment plans, the precision medicine, the precision diagnosis, as well as discovery and scientific understanding of what's happening, that's to come in the future. It's evolving rapidly and quickly and exciting, but I think we're still very early on in the quote unquote efficiency plays of using AI.
Yeah, and that's exactly from a provider standpoint how what Dan and Chris said, how we're using it today. So we're deploying ambient AI listening in physician encounters with families. It's beautiful because they can really focus on the family, and it's really cool how the note that comes out afterwards, particularly as you sort of optimize it, has the key components for billing and for the records. We use it for scheduling. Our scheduling is very, very complicated. You think about feeding therapy and working on sleep and EEGs and ABA and home and school, and how do you put all of that together? That used to be pretty manual. We then started to make it very rules based, and now it's increasingly AI based. But all that's in the bucket of administrative. The real opportunity is, as Dan and Chris have said, is we sit on tons and tons of data in autism. So think about the eye tracking and all of that. But beyond that, the genetic tests we run, the lab tests, all the every day, whether it's a speech therapist or behavioral therapist, they're taking data. And so how can you synthesize all this and say what is the best therapy for a child at any given time, that kind of goes beyond what humans can do. I mean, physicians do their best with pulling all this data together and iterating on treatment plans. But to have this done in real time by AI is an incredible future opportunity.
And is there anything, Jennifer, you'd add?
I feel like the for-profit sector, has been really, really great to help pour gasoline on really great ideas that are able to make a difference. And so, having AI help make everything, more efficient, and having all this data make sense. And I just think it's helping change lives better and faster. And that's an easy concept to get behind.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And Jennifer, any final thing you'd say? I mean, you referenced this earlier, but as the landscape has evolved, one comment I've heard is that a lot of the early kind of funds going into the autism world were happening on the philanthropic and nonprofit side. And now it feels like we're transitioning to more of we're talking about private equity, we're talking about AIF, we're talking about investment dollars. And I have to imagine that's a good thing. But how do you think about that change as it relates to what it means for, the care of individuals with autism going forward?
Yeah, I think of philanthropy really as an investment. It's an investment into a community, helping lift up a segment of the population that, needs some help in some way. And so I started really thinking about it. in back in that day, it was sort of like, oh, you don't want to make money off of people, but it's I think that that viewpoint has really changed, and that really making solid investments into organizations and great ideas that were making a huge impact in actual lives, led to be better for those people as they grow into adulthood. Um, I think that's only a good thing, and I'm thrilled to see it happening. It's helping change lives for the better and faster, which is great.
Yeah. And Neil, tell me is Cortica in New Jersey? Can I go? Can I send my kid? Uh, do
We,
you
we
take
do,
UMR?
I believe we do, yeah, I think we do take UMR, and we are in New Jersey, in
Great.
the town of Warren. Yeah.
That's my big takeaway from today. We are approaching kind of the end of the hour here, so I do want to go around and get a lightning round kind of question from everybody before we go, which is, and kind of as we were just discussing with Jennifer and others, could you share one major prediction for investing in autism or behavioral health that you think we're going to begin to see more and more of as we look into 2026? Dealer's choice. Chris, you can go first.
Um, sure. I think we've hit on. Yeah, I have two small ones that are two ones that I'll say. I think the shift, as Jen just hit on and you hit on, um, from just private equity into public-private partnerships, but also public and foundational dollars shifting into for-profit investments. I was at the UN General Assembly a couple weeks ago. We met with 30 different kind of sovereign nations, institutional capital, and you're seeing an overall theme and eagerness from them to shift their capital into for-profit companies in this space because they want to see this be a catalyst and change faster, much like Jen just said, and Jen is doing with her capital as well. So that's an exciting one, not just on a national attention, but on global attention. This is a global challenge. So I think you'll see a lot more of that. And then the innovation is truly accelerating. We're at this inflection and unique point, and much like I mentioned before, I think you're going to see a few breakthroughs in the next few months and few years that are really going to change the outcomes and opportunities for the families and individuals that we serve. So I think it's a really exciting time.
Hmm. All right, Dan.
I would say just increasing demand for whole child care of the type that Neil and his colleagues are providing, and I think it will become more accessible because more payers are going to be engaging under pressure from the employer. So it's really like, to me, what will happen over this next year is that the delivery system should improve. We've seen a lot of fragmentation of the delivery system, which has been particularly onerous for families with kids with autism, and that's the part that I'm hopeful will be addressed over the next couple of years.
Yeah, my husband had like a mental breakdown trying to deal with submitting each time my daughter went to occupational therapy through I think we even were doing literal paperwork and sending it somewhere in Minnesota to
Yeah,
wait 4 months to get X cents on the dollar. And at some point you go, well, then it's not even worth getting reimbursed
right.
if you're in the luxury of being in that position. But then it's like, then why are we even paying for this?
He's
You know,
not. He is not alone. I mean, the
yeah.
frustration that the families feel, and again, we hear this because we listen to our employees. And what's amazing is, and this is like kind of dates back a few years when we stood up this group, we went out and started talking with employees. We expected to hear some of the more prevalent conditions like musculoskeletal and deliveries and all this other kinds of stuff. And honestly, it was the community of parents with kids with autism that were
Hmm.
the loudest and the most articulate about the failures of the delivery system. So it's exactly that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Neil, your prediction.
Yeah, just to doubling down on what Dan and Chris said, I hope and predict as well that the health plan system will reform in the way that Dan said, that they've got to pay for value, they've got to think about integrated whole person care, as opposed to the typical silos of behavioral health, separate from medical, separate from like ancillary services like OT, and streamline the experience. And then the other is this migration from siloed care delivery to integrated, really to the benefit of parents. Parents have a lot that they are dealing with. They should have the freedom to be great parents and not have to be worrying about filling out forms and driving all over town to get the care they need. And so it's a change in the payment system and a change in the clinical model that I hope, a year from now, if we reconvene, is in a better spot than it is today.
It'd be great if this feels to me like a 10-year out change. So I hope you guys are all right. And Jennifer, to you.
Oh, well, I can just say from the parent perspective that, 23 years ago, this is a very lonely, scary process to try to find, a path at all, to try to find, the best possible outcome and with the best happiness and the best, life that my son could live. And I think those days are now over. I think, there's the amount of access to information and resources just continues to get better and better. And I think it's going to be a lot different in 5 years.
That's wonderful. I think we'll leave it there. And before we officially adjourn today's event, just a huge thank you to all of you for being our panelists today, for your amazing insights, for the work that you're doing to help all these families and individuals with autism and with behavioral health conditions. And to the audience as well, thank you for your huge turnout for participating today. And of course, we'd all love to hear more feedback and more questions going forward. As Jennifer said, even 5 years ago, discussions like this would have been almost unthinkable, certainly at this scale. So, thanks to organizations like AIF, Morgan Health, the Frist Center, and Cortica, and so many others, we've got innovation and research and new discoveries happening at an accelerating pace. So, I look forward to hopefully being part of this continuing and ongoing important conversation. Thank you all for having me today, and thank you for being here. We'll leave it there and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, everyone.